Before we jump into this episode, I want to remind you that while Caitlin and Sophia are dietitians, we're not your dietitians. This means the information shared in the Food Freedom and Fertility podcast is intended to entertain, educate, and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care. This information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making any changes.
Happy Wednesday. It's Kaylee Hunt, the Food Freedom Fertility's podcast editor. This week's fan favorite is all about ovulation. Hosts Sophia and Caitlin speak about ways to know you are ovulating, what to look out for, what is normal around ovulation, and what is not normal. We hope you enjoy this re-released fan favorite episode.
Welcome to another episode of Food Freedom and Fertility. We are your guests, Sophia Pavia and Caitlin Johnson, registered dietitians, functional nutritionists, fertility specialists, females with babies. And we're trying to get you some good information today on ovulation.
We get tons of questions every single day on ovulation, and we want to demystify. So we're going to just touch on some of the most commonly asked questions today. Caitlin and I both have courses that you can buy online that teach you truly everything that she and I cumulatively know about ovulation, like everything.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are listening to this episode and you have questions like, but for me, it's blah, 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 blah. And what do I do if I blah, 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 blah? We've got the answer, and it's in our courses. So we're not going to go through, every single inevitability with ovulation today. We're just going to talk about some of the most common questions that we get and see if this kind of helps you figure out, are you ovulating? When are you ovulating? How can you predict your ovulation? How can you time sex well with your ovulation? And that's our goal for you today.
Because if you're trying to get pregnant, you need to ovulate an egg.
That is
happen. I naturally
did not
anyway.
realize how mind-blowing that simple sentence was. I thought this was just anybody knew. Everybody knew. Like, you have to have an egg to become pregnant. But you know what? A lot of people don't know that.
Really, we're just not taught very good information. I was just chatting with my intern earlier today about ovulation, how it's really the main event of a menstrual cycle, not your period bleed.
Not your period bleed.
Yeah. I mean, you don't even get a true period without ovulation. So
True dat.
Ovulation really is like, it's the diva coming on stage singing. It's that crescendo moment. It's that
It's Britney, bitch. That's what your egg says when it ovulates. It drops in and says, it's Britney, bitch.
So maybe should we zoom out a little bit and just go over some of the basics? Like, what is ovulation?
Yeah, like, what is ovulation? Yeah, you want to jump on that, or do you want me to?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
So ovulation is literally, it happens hopefully every menstrual cycle for us, and it is the event where a follicle has matured to the point in your ovary. It's the dominant, it's the winning follicle, end of the race, gets past the finish line and gets ejected out of your ovary, and your fallopian tubes, kind of like the fingers of them, kind of like wave and grab it and pull it into your fallopian tube. So it's really just like this, very quick event that happens, ovulation. But there's a lot of intricacies that go into if it's going to happen and what happens after it happens. And is it going to be a strong ovulation? What do we mean when we say stuff like that? But it's basically when the egg becomes available to your body for sperm to meet it and get inseminated.
That's pretty much it, y'all. So the egg, to give you a really brief synopsis of kind of what happens hormonally to lead up to ovulation, is you have certain hormones like estrogen and luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone that surge at various points, and one triggers the other, and they all kind of weave together in this chemical dance inside of your body that tell your brain to tell your ovaries, now's the time. This is the right time to let an egg loose, because now is a great time to be pregnant. We're healthy enough. We're strong enough. We've got everything we need. Let's do this, queen. And that's when your body will pop off that egg. So when the egg gets released from the follicle, that is, boom, that's ovulation, that very moment. So the event of ovulation is what we're talking about here today. When that egg gets released from the follicle. There are a few variations that can happen and certain things that can go awry. But we're just going to talk about, generally speaking, what's happening during ovulation. And because in our profession, Caitlin, I'm sure you would agree with this, when you're hearing hoofbeats, you think horse. You don't think zebra, right? Some of you are zebras, and some of you have things going on that are very, very rare. But that's why Caitlin and I have private practices and courses and things like that. By and large, for like 99.99% of you, everything we're going to talk about today is what is happening for you when it comes to ovulation.
So let's talk about when ovulation typically would happen in kind of a regular cycle. So somebody has their period. When can they expect ovulation to happen after that? Because somebody, we may have people that just have no idea when ovulation occurs. Does it occur in their period? Does it occur before or after?
If you have a bleed or your true period, let's just say you're bleeding and it's a true period, you are going to ovulate after that period. So it's called the menstrual cycle, meaning there really isn't like a top, bottom, beginning, end, like it's a cycle. So most practitioners decide that they're going to start the cycle on the first day of your bleed, because that's the first like observable point. You may not know exactly when you're ovulating. You may not know exactly when your body's preparing an egg, but you know when there's blood in your panties. You know that. You can see that very clearly. So that's why we call the first day of your bleed, your period, your menstruation. That's why we call that day one of your cycle. So just for explanatory purposes, that's how we're going to talk today. So ovulation is going to come after that bleed. For some of you, you may even still be having some bleeding when you ovulate. That is possible. You can ovulate real early.
Yeah. So you can have unprotected sex during your period and get pregnant.
Yes, you can.
So, everybody wants to talk about a perfect 28-day cycle, which hardly anyone actually has.
And it's not necessary to be healthy or to have babies.
No, absolutely not. And even if you're like, hey, I'm regular, I have a period every 30 days, you likely are not ovulating the exact same day in every cycle. So part of what Sophia and I do is really empower women to learn the signals that their body sends them, telling them when and if they're ovulating. And I think having just a very rudimentary understanding of what those signals are can help you start navigating these questions. Because one of the first things I hear in a PCOS population is like, hey, I get my period regularly. Am I ovulating? Like, I'm not the period fairy. I'm not God. I don't know. Unless you can give me some hard data, I really can't answer that question. So if you can learn these things, which all of us should have been taught in our teens, but most of us have not been, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but once you get it, it's so easy to interpret your body's own data that it's giving you to answer that question. Am I ovulating and when am I ovulating? So typically, like, let's say somebody had that perfect 28, 30-ish day cycle. You're typically going to ovulate about smack dab in the middle of that. So once you ovulate, you have about a 2-week period until your menstrual cycle bleed. So we're looking for ovulation somewhere about 14-ish days from when your next period is going to start. You don't know when that next period is going to start. So you have to learn these signals to be able to anticipate ovulation and then confirm it. So should we just break them apart one by one?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start with cervical mucus.
Okay. So cervical mucus is this beautiful, magic, amazing fluid that comes from your cervix and it comes down your vagina, and it can be observed in your panties or when you wipe. We have a whole episode on cervical mucus, but cervical mucus is one of the most reliable fertility signs, meaning once you see a change in your cervical mucus and you start seeing it go from kind of like a dry or a lotiony or a watery to like a stretchy, stringy, slippery, that is a beautiful clue that ovulation is going to happen soon or could happen soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a preview. And it's oftentimes why I like to talk about it first, because there are other signs that confirm ovulation, but they don't really tell you that ovulation is coming. So if you're trying to get pregnant or you're trying to avoid pregnancy, why are you listening to this podcast? But if you're trying to get pregnant, cervical mucus is one of your previews. It's your body telling you like, hey, I'm revving up. Your cervical mucus is kind of like the female counterpart to semen. It keeps sperm alive inside of you and helps it travel to the egg. So it changes over time. We won't get into the details too much more than that, but that kind of like snotty, clear snot, egg white type of cervical mucus is what we're looking for to give you a signal like, hey, it's time to get in the bedroom because you're fertile. Your body's trying to ovulate. So,
and sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, for some of us that have the conditions like PCOS, hypothalamic amenorrhea, we may have multiple times of seeing this fertile mucus without an ovulation. And this is because our body is trying to ovulate. So your body will be like, oh, wait, I think it's going to be okay. Let's do it and try to ovulate. But with something like PCOS, the signals that tell your ovaries to ovulate get so washed out in the sea of androgens, testosterone, estrogen. You just have so much hormone in your body all the time that your ovaries can't properly respond to a surge of hormone. It's that surge of hormone that makes your ovary ovulate. But if your hormones are surging constantly, which is what kind of happens with the overexcited, insulin-resistant body of someone with PCOS, the signal to ovulate, that surge, gets lost in the sauce. And with hypothalamic amenorrhea, it's the opposite. It's that there's so little hormone in your body that your body maybe can like tries to get a little bit of estrogen going and almost enough to make you ovulate. And it's enough to get that fertile mucus going. But by the time that's happening, you just kind of run out and everything peters back down. So you can see multiple days. You can see like 3 days of fertile mucus and then 4 days without it, and then 2 days with it and 1 day without it. It can seem really maddening, which is why we say when in doubt, bang it out, right? If you see fertile mucus, there's a chance that you can ovulate within the next 24 to 48 hours. So go for it. It's never going to be wrong to have sex with your partner. It's not going to be like, well, you shouldn't have done it yesterday because now your chances are ruined. It doesn't work like that. So if you think you're seeing some fertile mucus, even if you're not sure if that's what it is, or you've seen it a few days and then it went away and yada, yada, now it's back, go for it anyway.
Absolutely. So that's one marker. Another marker is cervical position. So where your cervix is in relation to like the opening of your vagina throughout your cycle gives us indications of if your body's gearing up to ovulate or if your body has just ovulated. So there's kind of like a shift that happens. Do you want to chat about that, Soph?
Yeah. So whether or not you want to believe this is just simply how our bodies work. So our biology wants us to be pregnant as much as possible during our short little human existence. It's a part of what it means to be a mammal, or really any creature. This is like every creature that's ever lived. Their main goal of life is to have their genetics get passed on to the next generation. So when we look at humans as kind of like an animal, what happens during ovulation or getting near to ovulation is your cervix will go kind of pull up higher inside your vagina, and your vagina kind of elongates because of that. So you'll find that if you reach inside your vagina to touch your cervix, it's further up and harder to reach. This is because your body wants you to be able to get a penis deep inside you so that you can get that sperm up close to those ovaries, up close to those fallopian tubes, up close to that uterus, so that you have the best chances of conception, because a vagina is a hostile environment for sperm. The uterus, the cervix, the fallopian tubes, that's a better place. The vagina is really acidic to kind of keep you from getting infections and stuff. So we want that sperm to get up inside the cervix, up inside the fallopian tubes. And that's why your cervical position will change. As you near ovulation, your cervix will start to rise up and become harder to touch when you reach inside your vagina. So this is why we say every day, touch your cervix, because it takes about a full cycle to learn what this feels like for you. Because if you have no reference point as to what's high or low, you don't know. So you got to touch your cervix every day, and it will tell you when you're getting ready to ovulate by raising up inside of you. Yeah.
And then after you ovulate, what happens?
Baby shop is closed. The cervix drops down, it gets firm, it gets hard, it gets closed up tight, because again, we don't want germs and such to be making it up into your internal organs. So your body kind of takes this calculated risk at the time of ovulation to open up more, to make it easier to get a penis inside, to soften that cervix, to open it up a little bit, so that more sperm can make it inside. And then after ovulation, the surge of progesterone that you have causes that cervix to come back down low, to close tight, and to be, not want to be touched anymore. This is part of why I'm sure you've noticed, like, there are times when you can have sex in any position and it feels great. You can be on top and there's no problems. No matter what, it's just, you can do whatever you want to do. And a couple days later, you're like, oh my God, you're poking my soul. And it feels like, really uncomfortable to have any kind of deep penetration. And that is that hormonal change. During ovulation, you can enjoy deeper penetration, whereas after ovulation or long before ovulation, it's kind of like your body's saying the baby shop is closed. Don't get that thing too high up in here.
So if you get to a point where you're like, I can't feel my cervix, your body's trying to rev up to ovulate, likely. If you can get like a knuckle or two in and you start feeling like it's way easier to reach, you've just felt the shift. And I like to tell people, sometimes it takes a full 2 to 3 cycles to really get this sign down, to really get comfortable. I tell people to check in the shower, but you really want to check every day. So if you don't shower every day, you need to find another time, do it with clean hands. That's cervical position. And then the last one's basal body temperature. So every morning waking up and taking your temperature either with an oral thermometer. If you're really into checking internal temps in other areas, more power to you, but oral is good enough. Or using a wearable device, but a way to track your temperature every single day and look for variation. And that variation that we're looking for after ovulation, your body sends out this egg, and then what gets left behind becomes this like temporary endocrine or hormone producing organ within your ovary and starts making progesterone. And that progesterone, you got to think about it like the duck sitting on the egg. It's incubating. It's creating a more opportune environment for cells to divide in your body and for an egg that meets sperm to divide and grow. And so your body temperature will increase just like a chicken or a duck sitting on their eggs is keeping an egg warm. So that increase, that shift in your thermal temperature is what we're looking for. And the reason why we like to do it in the morning is we're trying to look at your baseline temperature, that basal temperature where you haven't gotten up, you haven't walked around, you haven't, gotten in a frustrating conversation with your spouse and your, blood pressure and heart rate spiked and your temp went up, or you took a shower. It's all these things affect your temperature. But every morning at the same time, when you wake up, your temperature should be fairly regular. There shouldn't be as much variation to it. So looking at that basal body temperature when you wake, and there's lots of things to know about this that we're not going to go into today, but essentially what we're looking for is half to a full degree shift in your temperature from pre-ovulatory temps to after ovulatory or post-ovulatory temps to indicate that you've ovulated. And this is probably, I would say, one of the easier things to learn how to interpret, but it's not as helpful when you're trying to conceive to time sex well. Unless after a few cycles, you start seeing a rhythm based on your temps, like, oh, well, I always ovulate between days 15 and 18. Okay, well, that's great data, but you may not have that going into it. And so you really do need to rely on these other signals your body's sending you, that cervical mucus in the cervical position, to give you that preview that ovulation's coming. Basal body temping tells you ovulation occurred. And this is maybe one of the biggest mistakes that I see is people are like watching their BBT looking for a dip right before ovulation. And so every time their temp goes down, they're like, oh, I'm about to ovulate because they've heard my temp might dip before ovulation. And that just doesn't happen reliably for everyone.
That is very, very true. Very, very true. And I don't know what that is. You know what? There's my speculation on this. I think that as women who are struggling to conceive, we tend to view ourselves as the canary in the coal mine. Like if there is a 0.1% chance something's going to happen, oh, it's going to happen to me because I'm just that kind of person. And that's just the energy I put into the universe. I had someone say that to me yesterday. And I was like, that's crap. Okay, no. Again, you want to look for, if you hear hoofbeats, look for the horse, not the zebra. There's way more horses in the world than there are zebras. So you want to start with what is the most likely thing to be happening. And it will happen. Have a thermal shift upward once you ovulate. That is definitely. You will not always see this dip before ovulation. So use BBT for what it's meant for.
So that's kind of the basics. Let's get into the FAQs, like frequently asked questions around this.
Sure.
So do you want to kind of shoot off the hip? We can ask each other questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so I said just now, you will see a spike in your BBT. What if your spike is kind of not that robust of a spike? Like what if it's kind of low, or like your basal body temperature is consistently low, and then this quote unquote spike you see is more like a little molehill? What do you think of something like that?
Yeah. So there are a couple of questions I would ask that person. First of all, I always want to see 3 higher temperatures in a row to say that was ovulation. Like if you have one day where it's high, you might have drank alcohol or slept crappy. Okay. But if your numbers are consistently low, but you see a thermal shift and it still seems low, I start questioning, how's your thyroid health? Because your thyroid is kind of like the thermostat for your body in a way. And if you are experiencing hypothyroidism, underactive thyroid, you're not converting T4 to T3 very well, your temps can be chronically low. And even though you may be ovulating, you may not be at kind of a core body temperature that would be, what's the word? Positive, like a good
indicative.
Environment.
Okay.
Yeah, like a good environment. Conducive, yeah, for implantation and for a baby to thrive. So I always want to dig a little bit deeper. One thing that I've seen more lately is people are using wearables that are relying on skin temperature. So if you're using the Ava bracelet, this is around your wrist. If you're using the temp drop, around your arm, different than the OvuSense, which is inserted into your vagina. That is an internal temperature, just like your oral temperature would be internal. One of the things that I'm wondering is it just that we're looking at a skin temperature? So sometimes I'll have people get a basal body temperature thermometer, which is a thermometer that goes to 2 decimal places. And I will have them confirm for 2 or 3 days what their internal body temperature is. Because maybe you're seeing 96.8, but your oral temperature was 97.0, right? So like, it's really not that low. But maybe you're seeing 96.8 on your skin and your oral temperature is 96.5. So it actually is a little bit low. So I think thyroid, I want to confirm, is it actually low, especially if you're wearing a wearable?
Mm-hmm.
And then if we get a full thyroid panel and things look good, the next question that I'm asking is there one of these scenarios where your body just doesn't feel like it's getting enough of the energy, nutrients for the amount of output you have? So another way to say that is potentially, could you be under-nourishing, under-eating, or overperforming, over-exercising for the amount that you're eating? Because sometimes that will show up as chronically lower temperatures. Another thing that I look at if somebody's using an oral thermometer is, have they had it in their mouth long enough? So when you're oral temping, Lisa Hendrickson-Jacks, who's the queen of fertility tracking, she has the Fertility Friday podcast. She recommends holding the thermometer in your mouth for 10 minutes before you turn it on. I think that that's a pretty big ask. I get that it may be creating a little bit of a more reliable data point, but I think maybe 5 minutes. So you wake up, you roll over, you put the thermometer in your mouth, you let it sit for 5 minutes before you turn it on to take your temperature. You may see that you get a little bit of a higher temperature and you're not actually experiencing lows. It's just the thermometer is not really like warm enough to get an accurate temp.
That's true, especially if it's sitting in a cold room. Like if you like to sleep in a cold room, like me, I love to have my room nice and cold. My room temperature is like 30 degrees colder than my body temperature. So that's kind of a big jump.
What's the best way to track and confirm ovulation? So we've kind of gone over a few of these things so far. So Sophia and I really will stand on the mountaintop and proclaim that it's so important for you to track your own body signals and not rely on external data points necessarily to track this for you. So cervical mucus, basal body temperature, cervical position. These are the things that we invariably want to try and track and get those data points for you. But there are other ways to predict ovulation, and there are other ways to confirm ovulation. And since we get asked this question a lot, I think it's worth kind of going over this data for you. So one question that we get all the time is, I'm using LH strips, and so these are ovulation predictor kits. It's the same thing as an LH strip. And it's hard for me to interpret. Am I actually surging? I never see it positive, or I all the time see it positive. So what you need to know about LH strips is that they're testing for a metabolite of LH in your urine. And they're testing to see, is this level high enough for kind of what Sophia was talking about earlier, this hormonal dance, this chemical signaling to make your body ovulate. LH is something that surges right before you ovulate. So testing for this, for some people, can be helpful. For most people, it has some major negatives. The first negative is that it only gives you a window before ovulation about 36 hours, 24 to 36 hours. So you test, you see a spike, you go have sex. Well, you may have just lost 3 to 4 fertile days that if you were relying on your cervical mucus, you would have known, hey, I'm about to ovulate because my estrogen surged, my cervical mucus changed even before this LH surge happened. And sperm can live inside of your cervical mucus for up to 5 days, research has showed us. So you could have had sex 2 to 3 days ago and then again had sex because you're continuing to see cervical mucus and had more opportunity for more sperm to make it to the egg. Because we want that sperm inside of you, ideally, even before you ovulate.
Oh, definitely before you ovulate. Yeah. Because that egg just breezes past. All right. Yes. It's the sperm who are the creepy loiterers who are waiting around, sniffing, looking, licking. When's she going to get here? And then the egg just kind of that's when she does, it's Brittany,
the
bitch.
Diva dance. Yeah.
and she breezes past. So she's really only there for 18 to 24 hours, I'd say, for a healthy
Yes.
egg to be
Yes.
ready for implantation.
Yes.
So it's the sperm who are this creepy stalkers hanging outside her window, waiting for her to leave her house so that they can hop on it.
Absolutely. And so while LH strips may be helpful to give you a preview, one of the big things about only relying upon them is that you lose out on some fertile days to optimize sex timing. One of the other major issues is that in certain populations, you can have high LH all the time. And so you see positive after positive after positive, and you are in this like sex triggered state where you're always seeing these positives, you're always having sex, and you know that you're not that fertile because you haven't gotten pregnant yet. Like it just can't be a true marker for you. We see this a lot in the PCOS population where LH is just high all the time. And so it's hard for your body to reliably use that as an indicator that ovulation's coming. And likewise, you can see at the other end where the strips just aren't always so accurate. Maybe the timing of the day, LH surges at certain points. Maybe you always test in the morning. LH strips need to be tested more in the afternoon hours to be accurate. And you're just missing it. And so if you're only relying on these test strips, you may miss ovulation altogether.
You may. And this isn't even accounting for the fact that these are just mass produced in factories and don't have a lot of quality testing depending on where you're getting it. This doesn't account for the fact that they're expensive and you're running through them day after day. This doesn't account for the fact that some of us just don't metabolize LH the same way. And so we don't make enough, even when our LH is just surging greatly, we don't excrete the metabolite in numbers big enough to trigger a surge on an LH strip. This doesn't account for the fact that your LH is surging, right? Let's say it's surging at 9 a.m. And now that's when your body's making urine all the time, right? So you might not be peeing out 9 a.m.'s urine until noon. Like it just, there's
hydration can affect
quite
it.
a delay.
I mean, there's just so much.
The dilution of your urine can really affect it. There is just so many reasons why these are so inaccurate. And I really advise people against them because I feel like they just make you crazy. They just make you crazy.
It can really disconnect you from really learning your body's own signals.
Yeah, it's a very American thing to want to like pee on a strip and have it give us something, whereas like touching your own vagina is like, oh, nay. I don't want to do that. I want to save my
mucus. Ew, I don't want to touch my own mucus. Ugh.
Exactly.
So that's really, that's one of the main technologies for helping you to predict ovulation. There are other I don't even want to say apps, like true technology devices where you pee on a strip and it's looking at not just your LH, but your LH and your estrogen, and it's trying to help you predict ovulation. I've never tested any of them out and I don't recommend them because I think your body is smart enough to tell you. And I believe that women are smart enough to learn how to listen and can interpret this data on their own.
Amen.
In terms of confirming ovulation, there are a couple options that I do sometimes recommend, like proof strips or getting an actual serum or blood test of your progesterone levels. Because as we said earlier, you make progesterone after you ovulate. You don't make very much progesterone outside of ovulation, like hardly any at all. Your number should be very close to zero unless you ovulate, and then it's higher than that. So you can purchase at-home tests, and this is kind of new to the market in the last few years. And if you go to our very old, first 5 episodes, you can see an interview with Amy, who's one of the creators of this test strip called the Proof Strip. And I always, before I talked to her, I thought it was pro-ov, showing that you had ovulated, but
that
you're
proven
that you ovulated. And what this is testing for, it's very similar to using like a pregnancy test or one of those LH strips. You catch your urine, you dip the stick in it. It's testing for a different metabolite. We're trying to see, is there progesterone metabolites in your urine? And are they at a threshold that would indicate ovulation and adequate? They've designed this product very purposefully that it would show adequate progesterone to sustain your uterine lining for pregnancy. So the test strips come in packets so that you can test a few days in a row. And if you go listen to this episode, you'll learn, one of the reasons why this is important for some people is that you can ovulate and then your progesterone can drop prematurely and not give your body a chance for healthy implantation. And you can get pregnant over and over and over again and just not ever really get past like a week of pregnancy because your uterine lining sheds, or it wasn't prepared properly because you didn't have enough progesterone early enough after ovulation. So I don't know about you, Soph, but I like this test. I don't have everybody use it, but if I suspect when I see short luteal phases, I see spotting in luteal phases, and it's hard for them to get to a doctor to get a serum test, I think that this is a great option for kind of like more at-home information. So similar to it would be the 21-day progesterone lab that your doctor would order. And we call it the 21-day progesterone because it's 7 days after when doctors say you ovulate, day 14 of a 28-day cycle. The problem with that is most people don't ovulate on day 14 of their cycle. In fact, research shows us less than 10% of people ovulate on day 14, even when they have a regular cycle. So you could be ovulating on day 12, you could be ovulating on day 18. If you have really long cycles, even if you're ovulating, you may be ovulating after day 21. So if your doctor insists upon ordering this lab and only ever letting you run it on day 21 and is using this to say whether you ovulate or not, it may not be the full story. But what you should know about it is that if you are temping, and you can say very confidently based on your cervical mucus position and temping that you ovulated, let's say day 17, then you can ask your doctor for a day, quote unquote, 21 progesterone and go 7 days after day 17. So you'd go on day 24. Likewise, if you ovulated on day 30, you'd go on day 37. Mm-hmm. What they're testing for is progesterone levels in your blood, and this confirms for us if you've ovulated or not, because again, you don't have progesterone levels unless you ovulate. So there are other ways to predict and confirm ovulation, but they cost money and sometimes rely upon labs and doctors. And you can do this with a thermometer.
Doctors that you may have to fight with and argue with. Mm-hmm. Because believe it or not, doctors tend to be experts on the 10 different ways to manage a bleed during this certain kind of surgery and the 5 different ways to do this kind of suture. And they are such experts on these life-saving surgical techniques that they spend all of their careers focusing solely on how to keep people alive and have the best outcomes on the operating table. They haven't even looked at ovulation since like 16 years ago, their first week of school. So it's possible that your doctor is a brilliant surgeon and a total ignoramus when it comes to ovulation.
Yeah. So, you may need to advocate for yourself if you want to get a 21-day draw on a different day. But you do want to aim for about 7 days after ovulation. So if you ovulate on day 10 of your cycle, you want to go in around day 17. It's just a helpful way for us to interpret the data well. So another question that I get a lot is, can you ovulate more than one time in a cycle?
I get this question all the time too. And truthfully, no. Your body is not capable of having more than one ovulation in a cycle. It's possible to have more than one egg per ovulation. Like in the case of fraternal twins, you can have one ovary that pops off 2 eggs, or each ovary popping off an egg. But once an egg has left your ovary, that's it. There is no more ovulations that are going to happen. Shop is closed until after you've bled.
And that's another job of progesterone, is basically shutting down the production of other follicles maturing to the point of ovulation in that cycle. So if you confirm ovulation with 3 high temps in a row, we would tell you, and it is true and confirmed in science, that you will not ovulate again until either your period comes and you ovulate the next cycle, or an entire pregnancy occurs and the next time you ovulate. So there is a scenario where you could not get a period in between, and that would be pregnancy and childbirth. But other than
That's
that,
literally it. Yeah, there's
yeah.
no possibility. So you are not the 0.0000001% of people that
Mhm.
ovulates twice before a period. It is not humanly possible. Just like humans can't breathe underwater or fly through the sky like birds, just like we can't survive 90 days with no water. There's certain things
Mhm.
that our bodies just can't do. And one of them is ovulating twice in a cycle. We just can't do it.
Mhm. So, if you can only ovulate one time in a cycle, it's really important for you to know if you're trying to get pregnant, you have this window of 5 days before your ovulation event and 24 hours after that sex could occur that could yield pregnancy. And outside of that, no sex will yield pregnancy. This event of ovulation, this is kind of why we talk about it as like the diva and the exciting thing and what it all revolves around. This is why it's important, is because you are fertile. This egg has a limited lifespan, and then that's it. So get the sperm up in there and happy and ready, or have sex like immediately upon ovulation, or that's it. That's your opportunity each and every cycle.
Yep, that's the truth of the matter. And this is universally true for every single woman. And so you don't have to worry about maybe you have this like weird condition or this weird case and you're the one in a million, because it's not possible
Mm-hmm.
unless we're looking at
Okay.
like an X-Men scenario kind of thing. Great. So other questions that we get a lot of the time about ovulation are, what if you see fertile mucus multiple different times? When are you actually ovulating? And, is cervical mucus actually quote unquote reliable because you may be seeing it multiple times during your cycle?
Yeah. I mean, I see this a lot in PCOS where there is a body attempting to ovulate over and
Hmm.
over and over again, or you have consistently high estrogen. And so you just see more of this fertile type cervical mucus,
Hmm.
and it takes a while, it takes multiple attempts or longer into the cycle for kind of the stars to align hormonally for a person to actually, like for a female to get over the hump and actually ovulate. I see this get better as hormones improve, as we implement strategies for blood sugar management, um, just as things normalize, as different treatment modalities come into play. But it is common, it's not normal. Okay. So if you
Yep.
had
Yep.
like a 30-day cycle and your body only revved up to ovulate once, you shouldn't be seeing multiple peaks of fertile cervical mucus.
Yeah, I see this really commonly, this kind of question for people. Yes, with PCOS, also with people that are new to tracking. And
Mhm.
they just kind of think anytime they have any kind of moisture in their panties that it might be fertile mucus. They kind of are, I see this also when women are like really digging for mucus. You don't want to be
Mhm.
like putting your fingers in your vagina and touching your cervix to try to find mucus. Your vagina, your cervix, they are a moist environment. Your mucus membranes are always making mucus to keep that area clean and safe and healthy. So if you're putting your fingers in your vagina all the way up to your cervix, when you pull them out, yes, there will be moisture on your fingers. That is normal. That's not fertile mucus all the time. Fertile mucus is what we observe coming out of your vagina. So,
Mhm.
and in some women, maybe they don't have a lot that's actually coming out and observable. It does stay more inside. And so we're just looking for changes, okay? This is why you need to be tracking over multiple cycles, because you will have this kind of question like, I'm seeing it and I'm not seeing it and I'm seeing it all the time. When you're new to tracking, it just means you need more experience with your own vagina, with your own, kind of secretions, so that you can
Mhm.
understand changes. Because if you only have one piece of data, like you've only been checking for a short period of time, you're not going to really notice big changes or subtle changes. So you have to track for many cycles. And I know you want to be pregnant like yesterday, but this is just how it works.
Yeah. And so if you see what you think is fertile cervical mucus, you're trying to get pregnant, like get busy. Don't spend all the time analyzing it. Just go, this looks like it. Let's try. I mean, I remember posting
Yes.
like a year ago on my Instagram, like I had like such noticeable cervical mucus, had my phone near me. So I like showed
I
it
remember
on my
that.
stories and people were like, oh my God, thank you. I hear people talking about this. I hear it on your podcast. And yet like, I don't know that I've ever seen it. And finally I see what you're showing me and I realize I do have that. So, if you want to get, wild, Google it. There are pictures out there. Yeah.
There are pictures. Yeah, you can see what we're talking about and the differences between them. But just because I do see women that are ovulating, they're not having as much cervical mucus. You don't need to have like a huge flow of this stuff in order to get pregnant. And some of us more keep the mucus up inside, and that's okay. We have fertile cervical mucus. It's not like coming out of our vagina like in copious amounts, and that's okay. That's okay. You can still get pregnant. That's why we're looking for what's normal for you. So, and that's why we use multiple fertile signs. We're not only using mucus. We're not only using PPT. We're not only using cervical position. We're putting all of this together to get a picture of your fertility. Because if we just look at one thing in a vacuum, it makes it very hard to know what's going on.
And so paying attention to kind of those nuances, those intricacies, you may not, as Sophia just said, see lots of it, but you may feel moistness, right? Certain times of your cycle versus others where it feels really dry. You may notice that moistness more when you're wiping. So, I would say, if anything, just get curious about your body and start listening to what it's doing. Start really actually paying attention to the signs because you are more expert than even we are on your body, right? Like,
yeah, if something goes wrong, you're the first to know.
Yep. And oftentimes it's just digging out some answers to these questions. So pay attention for moistness when you're walking around, pay attention for moistness when you're wiping. If you're somebody that says like, I don't really know what you're talking about. I don't feel like I've ever seen that. But to answer your question, yes, you can have multiple peaks. If you're trying to conceive, you got to take every peak seriously because you're not going to know when you're actually ovulating unless you're pairing this with another tracking method like BBT to be able to tell that your temperature shifted.
And it's not wrong to have sex. That's the other thing is it's not like if you did it at the wrong time, now your chances are ruined. Not at all. Your partner makes fresh sperm all the time. So you can have sex anytime you think you might be fertile and it's not wrong. You're not going to be like, oh, well, we already did it on Thursday, so we can't do it again on Saturday. Like, yes, you can.
And what's worse would be assuming because you saw fertile cervical mucus that was the only time you were fertile, have sex and then not have sex when you see it again. Right. So like you got to take it seriously when you see it. I've also seen some people say that if you have really high estrogen and really low progesterone, you can start seeing this more fertile type cervical mucus in the luteal phase. It makes sense if you have really low progesterone.
Yeah, it would have to be dumpster low.
Really,
which I mean, low.
I've seen in lab work. I've seen 3s and 4s, like somebody ovulated, but it's really low. I haven't seen this as much in practice, but your body's making mucus out of your cervix all the time. It's just, it varies based on hormonal changes throughout your cycle. So the moral of the story is if you see it and you're trying to get pregnant, that's when it's time to get busy because you want to take that seriously and not miss an opportunity just because you thought you ovulated last week. Okay, ready to move on to next question?
Yes, I am.
Spot around ovulation to have a little bit of bleeding around ovulation?
It is common. I wouldn't say that it's normal. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're seeing here. Because yes, when you ovulate, there is a follicle on your ovary that breaks open and an egg comes out. It is potentially possible for the little blood vessels that service that follicle to break open as well, when that egg comes out of the follicle. When that follicle ruptures, it's possible for there to be a bit of bleeding. That bit of bleeding is so minuscule. It's a teeny tiny amount of blood. We're talking like a couple cells, really not much at all. So once you understand kind of the anatomy, so not only that, like your ovary is actually pretty darn far away from your vagina, and it's not actually directly connected. It's by extension connected to your vagina, but it's not really connected to it. It's not like it's right there. And so any bit of blood is definitely going to come down. It's actually more common for that bleeding to kind of go into your abdominal cavity and not through the fallopian tube, down through the uterus, out the cervix, down the vagina, and out onto your toilet paper or panties. So what we're seeing during that time is if you're having bleeding at ovulation, it's likely that you're just having so much estrogen surging, unopposed by progesterone, that your uterus is losing some of its cells because it's so much estrogen. So it's
and you got to
common.
think about the anatomy again, right? Your cervix
Mhm.
opened up a little bit around ovulation. It softened, it thinned to try to allow for sperm to make it through. So it's more of an opportunity at this time than any other for a little bit of bleeding to escape, right?
Mhm.
Like blood to escape.
Yes. So, boy, we just get so intensely focused on any kind of pregnancy sign, fertile sign, all this stuff during when we're trying to conceive, that we're like really hoping that anything we see at all is a sign that we're pregnant or could be pregnant or about to get pregnant. And so I see this a lot where people are like, implantation bleeding, tell me it's real. And it is possible, but again, we're talking about like a couple cells, right? It's like really small and very rare. And most of the time, that bleeding is associated with something else. So if you're spotting around ovulation, first of all, I would want you to get checked out and make sure there's no like polyps going on, because having endometrial polyps can make you bleed from that when you have that hormone surge at ovulation. This is what was happening to me.
Polyps, fibroids, like there are
Mhm.
reasons you could be bleeding that maybe seems like it's ovulation, but it's just because of hormones around the time of ovulation that also nurture
Yes.
ovulation take place.
So I'm not going to say it's impossible that the little bit of blood that could potentially occur when you ovulate could be making it through your fallopian tube, could come down through your uterus, could come out your vagina, and you could see it. That's possible, but is it likely? Not really. You're probably having something else going on.
I mean, I just had this come up with one of my gals in my Find Fertility course where she was like around the time she was ovulating, had sex, had some bleeding after sex that didn't seem like spotting. It seemed like real, like a true period bleed. And she's like, oh my gosh, is my cycle messed up? Like, did I just have like a 15, 16-day cycle? What is wrong with me? You know, I'm doing all this work. And I was like, that's not normal bleeding. And you didn't ovulate. So unless the bleeding stops, it's your period. And that's not a normal length of time to be getting your period. I would go to the OB and get checked out. And sure enough, she did. And it ended up being cervical ectropion, which is essentially where like the cells from the inside of your cervix migrate to the outside of your cervix and are softer and more vascular and sex. So just the normal act of it,
The friction,
penetration,
yeah.
rubbing, can aggravate it and cause it to bleed, and it would more mimic a period bleed. So there's other reasons where it's like you could be bleeding that is not normal. And in this case, this is not very harmful, but
Yeah, it's not like it's dangerous to her body,
right.
but it isn't a normal thing.
Not an STD, not cancer, but it it actually made sense why it was happening, or more so around ovulation, because the cells are more likely to bleed when you have estrogen surges. So there are things about it where it's like, okay, well, it might not happen to her any other time she has sex in her cycle than when her estrogen's surging. But going in and getting checked out is never a wrong thing to do either.
Yep. So that kind of segues into pain and cramping with ovulation. Is this normal? Does it mean you're ovulating? And so, ladies, we've got a lot of body parts in our bellies. So when we're having pain and cramping, I know you want it to be ovulation. I know you do. I know you're just so hoping that you are ovulating and getting ready to get pregnant, and you want that to be the case so much. However, there was a small study done, it was small, where they kind of interviewed women about like ovulation, cramping, and pain. And they paired up the data of like, okay, what kind of symptoms are you experiencing? And then actually measured when are they actually ovulating. And all the women that said, I'm having pain with ovulation, they weren't even ovulating the day they said they had pain. It wasn't that. You have got muscles that connect to your back and your legs, all in that area of your pelvis. You have got many different organs. You've got your intestines. You've got a lot going on in that area. And a lot of times we feel a twinge or a pinch or a cramp, and it has nothing to do with ovulation at all. It's our iliopsoas muscle or our round ligament. It's our large intestine. It's a gas bubble. It is nothing to do with ovulation at all. So a lot of times, almost always, the women that I know that say, oh, well, I don't need to check my fertile signs because I just feel when I ovulate. They are dead freaking wrong. Dead wrong every single time. Never have I ever seen a woman who says she knows and can feels when she ovulates who's actually got it right. So,
and frankly, if you're trying to get pregnant, even if you had that superpower, it's pretty much too late to have sex. Like,
yep.
So even if, so they call this sensation middle schmerz, right? It's like this,
which is a really funny word.
Schmerz. You can feel it. It might be a little bit, it shouldn't be like extremely painful. Could be like a dull cramp or, just a sensation that happens for a minute to a few minutes. I mean, it shouldn't be something that lasts for hours. And there are women that say that they feel it and it does align more closely to when their temperature shifts. I don't know. I don't have an ultrasound of everyone's abdomen all the time. It's not reliable.
It's not reliable. It's not reliable. And yeah, it's not reliable. Please don't think that you're the one person in all humanity that can feel the moment they ovulate. Because there are a lot of things that shift. Even if let's say you do have some sensations in your ovaries around the time of ovulation, I'll give you that. To think that you are pinpointing the exact moment that follicle is rupturing and you feel that, it's just not happening. I don't disagree that you feel something. You do. This is your body. You're feeling something going on. But you're not feeling that exact moment of ovulation. And so because of that, it's just really not reliable. And if you are having pain, we need to look into that. Okay, that's something to look at. This is not like a normal thing that's like, oh, I just feel my ovulation and it feels like this pinch of pain. It could be many different things. So if you're consistently having pain with ovulation and cramping, it's more likely that there is too much estrogen going on. It could be that you already ovulated and your progesterone is just being really low and slow to come up. It could be that you ovulated already and you do have healthy progesterone, and that healthy progesterone is causing your intestines to slow down. So you're having more of that like heavy bloat kind of cramp feeling in your abdomen, and it's actually your intestines full of doo-doo, and it's not your uterus that you're feeling at all. Could be that your intestines are pressing on your uterus because they're big and full of doo-doo because all that progesterone has slowed down your pooping. That can happen too. So there's my answer to that. I hate when I see women that refuse to do what we know works, which is symptoms and temperature. They refuse to do that because they just believe in their heart of hearts that they know exactly when they're ovulating and they can just feel it. And so they don't need any other information than only that. It's just they're missing out on a lot when I see that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I'd go as far to say that like somebody could never feel it. I just think you're more likely wrong. Right.
Yeah,
So like
exactly.
do the things that are reliable.
Do the thing. Like, yes, I don't doubt that you're feeling something. I just don't, I'm not convinced enough that it's absolutely ovulation to where we're going to like throw these tried and true methods out the window, or that you have no use for them. You do have use for them.
Yeah. And so let's segue and do this question where when's the best time to have sex in order to get pregnant around ovulation? Because if we're telling people,
Yeah.
hey, by the time you ovulate and you feel that, it's too late. Why is it too late?
Yeah. Well, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the episode. It's because your egg just kind of breezes past. Eggs are only viable for at max 24 hours after they've left the follicular sac. So once you ovulate, that clock is ticking quick. Eggs are very fragile and they go bad real fast. So you want to make sure that you have sperm in the fallopian tube before ovulation. You want, when that egg bursts out of the sac, you want there to already be sperm right there, not waiting until you see ovulation happening to then have sex. You want it to be before.
Right. I mean, that's for those of you that have ever done IUI and they've been tracking and watching for the follicle, and then they give you have you come in. They're timing things intricately. If you're doing Clomid or Letrozole and they give you a trigger shot and tell you to go home and have sex that night, they're timing things so that you have sperm in your fallopian tube by the time that follicle bursts, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
it's important that you don't wait too long. It doesn't mean that if you see your temperature shift up that it's necessarily too late, but it's more likely too late than if you saw fertile cervical mucus and you could predict ovulation was coming. So, you have this 5-ish day window that sperm can stay alive in fertile cervical mucus. So, since we can't tell you the exact day you're going to ovulate every cycle, once you start seeing that fertile cervical mucus, that's when start having sex every other day until you see your temperature shift go up.
Yeah. And like we said earlier, it's never the wrong time. There are times when it's the right time, but there aren't times where it's the wrong time. So it's never going to be that like, okay, well, we did it yesterday. And so now that now I see fertile mucus today. Oh, I really wish we hadn't done it yesterday. Maybe there are things like for your own comfort, like maybe your own body just feels a little bit more irritated if you're having sex too frequently. And so you're like, ugh, I don't really want to do it today because it's going to be uncomfortable. But it's not going to be like harmful for your fertility journey from having sex 2 days in a row or 3 days in a row. It's going to be just fine.
So the last question that we have is, my temps seem all over the place. Am I actually ovulating? Like I see it spike 10 times in my cycle. What's happening here when that happens?
Yeah, so I did a Instagram post on this recently. There are actually a lot of things that can make your temperature spike high. So if you're having a kind of a one-off crappy night of sleep, if you were going to bed really late, if you are sick or injured, stressed, in pain, if you're traveling,
if you drink
if you
alcohol,
if you're at a higher altitude, briefly, like you went on a ski trip and so you went up to the mountains for the weekend and you notice that your temperature's higher, altitude can do that. There are a lot of things that can cause that kind of like one off, two off high temperature. And that's why we confirm ovulation with 3 temps that are at least a half a degree, if not a full degree higher than the previous, 5 temps? Is that how we like it? Is that what you, yeah. So 3 that are higher than the previous 5. That's how we can it, because
because that variation of like 97, 96.6, 97.1, 96.4, that type of variation is very normal pre-ovulatory. But once you ovulate, it's going to go up and stay up. You'll get to 97.5, 97.7, 97.6. All of those will stay above a certain threshold that we like to call in charting like a cover line, where all your temperatures before ovulation maybe with an exception of like crappy sleep and a glass of wine, are all
Uh-huh.
underneath this line. And then after ovulation, all your temps stay up. So if you're just seeing a
Yep.
1-off, 2-off days, there's usually an explanation. I just recently had a client that was like, I'm on vacation and I ovulated. And we looked at it and she's like, oh, my temp came down. And I was like, well, did you sleep okay? You got jet lag. Did you guys drink? She's like, oh, we were drinking. Like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
don't drink tonight. Let's watch your temp tomorrow. And again, it was down. I was like, yeah, I'm sorry. I know it's such a bummer. Boy, it would have been
No.
fun to ovulate on while you're traveling, and probably you had more opportunity to have sex now than back at home with
I
no
know.
daily
And isn't that
pressures.
the dream? Because you just, I talked about this on my Instagram yesterday about trying to conceive and how it feels
Mm.
somehow weird or embarrassing to try. Like we're trying to have a baby. Like we just kind of glorify in our culture this like, oh, whoops, looks like we had a little too much fun on vacation. Like you want to be able to have it be not on purpose and just I don't know, people say so many things. It's like, oops, we brought home a souvenir from our vacation. And it seems like it's just such a glamorous thing to get pregnant on vacation or to have like, oh, surprise pregnancy. And it can
Or
be
it's what
tough.
people tell you will happen, right? Like, oh, if you just go
Yes.
relax for a little bit, if you just go relax, then it'll happen.
And yes, stress impacts fertility, but that doesn't mean relaxation is the only medical treatment possible.
Right.
Yeah. So you're right. And I'm sorry that person didn't ovulate on vacation. It would have been fun. We just, that is so much of what we're talking about today, these ovulation FAQ. So many of these
Mm.
things come up because our patients want to have ovulated so badly. They want
Mhm.
it, want it, want it. And we want it for them that they often think all of these things are pointing to ovulation or pregnancy. And some of them just aren't. And we have to look at and it's not bad that she didn't ovulate. It means she's gonna ovulate. It's gonna happen. It just didn't happen that day.
Right, exactly. And when you are struggling to ovulate and you're waiting so long, or you had a long cycle last time, you're like, oh, I could have ovulated on day 13. It can be so exciting and can be such a
Mm-hmm.
letdown. And I think that those peaks and
Definitely.
valleys, those letdown moments are when having support, whether that's community around you, whether it's the right practitioner, can be the difference between like giving up and trudging forward. Like how long are you hanging out in that valley? Like, let's get back
Yeah.
up.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Hopefully, this podcast is a little bit of that for some of you gals.
We hope
Any
so.
other
So before
ovulation questions?
I don't have another question, but Caitlin, I think I'd like to take this moment to really take a dump on OPKs. We talked about
Okay.
that before we
Yeah.
started recording this. We want to give you guys our full opinion on ovulation predictor kits and why neither of us recommend them. And
Mhm.
when it comes down to it, really the only reason that I don't like OPKs is because we are already giving you many things to focus on when it comes to fertility that are actually beneficial. And these
That
ovulation
hopefully aren't
predictor kits,
triggering.
yeah, that aren't triggering, hopefully. And these ovulation predictor kits are just one more thing that you feel like you have to do, and they're
Or
not
buy.
accurate. Yeah, do or
Yeah.
buy or use, and they're not accurate. And so
Mhm.
sometimes they could be accurate for some people. That is true. So if it's sometimes accurate for some people, why not recommend them? Because it's just another thing to do.
Mhm.
It's
The
another thing
other
to do
thing that
that's
I
not
see
as accurate as
sometimes,
the other things.
somebody will see a peak and they'll have all the sex and then they don't ovulate. And because they aren't tracking these other signs, they don't know they didn't ovulate. And then a week and a half later, they ovulate and they didn't time sex well. Like it can be,
Yeah, or you end
really
up having
deceptive
these
almost.
weird questions of like, my luteal phase is 30 days long, and we're like, it isn't.
No. Yeah.
You didn't ovulate. My
Mhm.
luteal phase is 22 days long. It isn't. You didn't ovulate
Mhm.
till later in your cycle. And then that's inevitably when I hear the person be like, no, I felt it when I ovulated. And that's when I'm like, this is
Then you need to
this
take
is
a pregnancy test. Like I just had this in my group too. Somebody was like, I'm having an 18-day luteal phase. And I was like, have you taken a pregnancy test yet? And she's like, no. And I was like, okay, tomorrow morning. And sure enough, she came back on and she's like, oh my God, I'm pregnant. Luteal phases that last longer than 17 days are usually a sign that pregnancy is happening.
And 17 days is straight pushing it. All right. That is
definitely
a long ass luteal phase, like
that
longer than I've ever even heard of.
Yeah. I usually tell people wait 3 days until after we think before you start testing.
And you can test anytime you want, ladies. We just don't want you to feel bummed by seeing the negative test or to see the negative test and be like, shots, and then be like, oh no, I actually was pregnant. Poor baby. So yeah, OPKs, ladies, they're going to drive you nuts. They're inaccurate, and focus your energy, your money, your time on the fertile signs that actually work and show you something, and not this pea stick that's just hit or miss.
That will work for you your entire life. Because, after you have a baby, if you don't want to have babies, if you know how to listen to your body, you don't have to be paying on OPK strips to not get pregnant. And that probably won't turn out very well for you anyway.
Yeah, that is not a reliable birth control method.
If you're going to use them, tips, do it in the afternoon. So when you test for pregnancy, you test for pregnancy first urine in the morning. When you're testing an LH strip, don't use your first morning urine. Use afternoon, right after lunch type urine.
Yeah.
But we would recommend you not use them. But if you are going to use them,
if you insist on using them and you're so sure that they work for you, then use them in the afternoon.
And we said this earlier, but it's only predicting ovulation by 24 to 36 hours. You've just shortened your chances of getting sperm where it needs to be. If you just been listening to your fertile signs, you might have had sex more times and had more boys waiting for that beautiful follicle to show up.
Yep. Right. Well, that's another episode on the books for Food Freedom and Fertility. We are happy that you gave this a listen. Please go onto wherever you're listening to this and give us a rate, a review, share with your friends, get the word out, because this is good information that none of us got taught. And the more people we share it with, the more people can get pregnant and have healthy babies.
Yeah, which is our goal.
That's why we're all here, right? That is why we're here. Do we want to do a yeah, girl?
Yeah, let's do a yeah, girl.
Okay. My yeah, girl is that we had our first Father's Day on Sunday. So, and my husband, who works out of town and is in the military and is gone a lot, was able to come home briefly. Yay. So we actually got to celebrate Father's Day with him, which was special. Really sweet. Yeah.
And his father passed away. Baby Natalie with cute pigtails on his visit
Isn't that
home.
cute? Oh my gosh. And you know what? She ate her first food last night.
Did she?
She did. She had her first non-breast milk food.
And did she love it, or was it
she was so into it. I just cut her off a piece of, we were eating steaks as Father's Day dinner. And I cut her off a strip of steak that she could hold on to and bite with her gums. And she loved it. She was so into it. It was the most peaceful dinner we've had. She wasn't squawking and flinging things. She was just sitting in her high chair, gumming on that piece of steak.
She loved awesomeness. It. That's awesome.
Loved it.
Well, I have a few clients who we were struggling to get them ovulating, struggling. And 2 of them within the past week had their second cycle in a row where we confirmed ovulation. So always really exciting, I guess on point with this episode, but exciting to see the progress in cycles and to be able to celebrate these mini wins kind of along the way. For sure. So
cool.
Next goal, ovulation check, pregnancy, next step. For a lot of gals with PCOS, it's that simple. We just got to get you ovulating, give you some chances at this.
So much, we just got to get sperm and egg there at the same time. For the majority of our listeners, that is the challenge. There are people that have deep fertility problems, and that Caitlin and I both work with them. But for the majority of y'all, it's just about getting your body healthy enough and getting sperm and egg at the right place at the right time.
All right. Well, tune in next week for an exciting episode. We are 1 year into podcasting next week. So it's Sophia.
We're going to do a reflective, a year looking back on our podcast anniversary.
We should come up with a fun giveaway for people.
We should.
Yeah. Think about that. All right. Tune in next week for a fun idea for a giveaway. We'll see you.
All right.